Welcome back to the loading zone. Today's deep thought: trucks have big wheels.
Currently, 2026 is the year trucking decided to play on expert mode. Rates are finally showing signs of life, just in time for insurance, fuel, equipment, and general operating costs to be on the rise. Cargo thieves are thriving and having a better year than some carriers are having. Electronic trucks are no longer a science project, they're a reality. And more drivers than ever are asking the same question: should I get my own authority, or am I volunteering to become a cautionary tale? Welcome to Brake Check. Today, we're going to find out. On today's show, we're going to go with Matt Roherty from CarrierForge, helping us understand what aspiring owner-operators should learn from scratch. And later on, we got Scott Cornell from Logistiq Insurance coming in to talk about locking down the risk side of the equation in a market where cargo theft is at record highs. But before we get into that, if you're serious about protecting your money and running smarter rather than harder, then like, subscribe, and follow for your top Freightcast, trucking news, and real trucking talk right here on FreightWaves. Also, we have an upcoming event. We have the Domestic Supply Chain Summit on June 17th. You want to be there. You want to understand what's happening, and you can find it right here. Just like our FreightWaves Today show, you should be checking this out. Craig and Julie are already in one episode. Today will be second episode. You do not want to miss this. They got 2 hours of power-packed freight casting just for you. But before we get into the show, let's talk about some trucking news. Trucking is full of opportunities where you can learn. There's also opportunities where you can miss the buck and get caught with your pants down, like this clip right here. Yeah. And see, there's a lot of things that are happening in the freight world right now, in the world in general right now. A lot of times people have aspiring goals to do something amazing. And, well, they might be kind of running like this clip right here on mouse power. You know, it's like the podcast that thought it could but never got started. Oof, that looks rough. It doesn't look like it's going anywhere anytime fast, but we are on Brake Check. So I'm going to bring up my first guest. We're going to be bringing on Matt Roherty with CarrierForge, and he's going to help us understand what's happening in the world out there right now as far as starting a company. So Matt Roherty has spent years at Schneider leading technology and operations before walking away to solve the problem that kills most trucking startups before they even get rolling. That's right, paperwork, permits, compliance. Matt Roherty is the co-founder of CarrierForge, a company built specifically to get carriers out the gate fast and make them profitable. He's on Brake Check today to break down exactly what it takes to take the leap from driver's seat to owner's seat. And welcome to Brake Check, my guy.
How's it going? How you doing? Nice to see you.
It's nice to see you again. You know, it's a nice early Tuesday morning. What better way to start it off than a conversation like this? A lot of people want to become a business owner, and we've had this discussion, but we're going to have it here. Not everyone should, and they should, if they do that, have a game plan to find success. So what was the start behind CarrierForge?
So like you just mentioned, I've worked in technology a long time. So, my co-founder and I, we had built a lot of products for, like employee drivers, asset-based companies, and driver kind of quality of life tools, things like that. And so just following the standard process of, you know, let's not build a solution and find a problem. Let's find a problem and then figure out how to build a solution for it. So we interviewed one thing we knew we wanted to do, because we had done so much asset work, we knew we wanted to go to the third party market, people with their own authority, and, you know, put something out to that market. And so we started by just interviewing people with their own authority, which generally tend to be small trucking companies. And most of the authorities and carriers out there are small trucking companies, either one truck or less than 10. So we were doing, we did hundreds of interviews, and we kept thinking, well, we could do this and we could solve this. And every time we found something, it was already on the market. There's so many people vying to build solutions for carriers, that even if you could build a good quality product, how do you market that would be a huge problem. But one kind of through line that kept coming back was most of the guys we talked to made some type of mistake in establishing their carrier, which either caused them almost to go out of business or had a significant impact on their profitability, or how long it took them to become profitable. And so then we kind of started looking at that. How do you create a motor carrier? What are those decisions? What are those permits? And that's the kind of the birth of CarrierForge, and it's evolved a lot over time, but still kind of our primary and core mission is helping people launch successfully and correctly, which is really more important than ever right now in this market. It's the scrutiny is increased, and there's just a lot going on, and so having everything done correctly the first time is a huge advantage. But we don't just stop at kind of permits and stuff like that. We actually take people through how to secure their first loads, how to work on the market, how to stay compliant, how to deal with all these obstacles that occur once they're operational. So it's kind of a program we say we are a compliance and permitting company, usually to introduce ourselves to clients is where they find us. But we're really more of like a mentorship program for that entire process of not only launching, but then operating. But that's really the start of it. Is we were looking for a problem, and what we identified was there's a huge gap in reputable, trustworthy companies with a good, a good, I guess, process to helping someone successfully launch while avoiding a lot of costs and also making sure they get what they actually need. So that
So
was
let's
our
talk startup. Like, I'm starting a company. What's the most common mistake you see happen in the first 90 days?
I would say just a lack of planning. It's like they know some of what they need, but not all of what they need, or they hyper focus on one part, but not the other, and understanding how it all comes together, right? So someone might be really focused on, well, how are they going to find freight? Where are they going to find freight? But then they don't do, so then they want to get right to that point or skip certain steps because they're not feeling they're ready for certain things that they feel like they should do later on, which actually affect how much freight they have access to, or vice versa. They're so focused on how do I legally be able to do this that they don't start the thought pattern of, okay, now I can do this. I have no idea how to go about actually putting freight in the back of this truck, or how much to charge, or what the broker is going to need to work with me. So it's kind of the plan, I think, is probably, and I think that's true across most businesses, is people want to jump in, they're motivated, they're hardworking, they have that entrepreneurial spirit. People aren't typically as good at planning, and so that's probably the biggest mistake I see, is a lack of having a plan and a process to actually go from establishing to making money and putting back cargo in the back of the truck.
Now, one of the tricky things in startups is the compliance minefield. And how do you navigate that? You got USDOT, authorities, 2290s. What does that process look like, and where do people often make the most mistakes in that?
Yeah, so I actually kind of leads back to one thing I tell people to kind of help them understand what CarrierForge is. At least part of it is, I like to say we're kind of like the legal Zoom of starting a trucking company. You have these products that make complicated, government legal filings easy. LegalZoom does that for getting your LLC. You have TurboTax for filing your taxes, and people are comfortable using these because they've made them extremely user friendly. So these are daunting processes that are easy to mess up if you do them directly with the government. But if you go through a service like this, it makes it easy, and affordable, because it's typically self-service. There's not someone sitting on the phone writing down everything you're saying, asking you questions. It's designed to be simple and do it right. These are very generic services, though. So where I see a lot of people go wrong is using a service like LegalZoom for a trucking company. They're going to sell them on things like a virtual address. Hey, you don't want your address public. Well, you're not going to be able to use that with the DOT. So now you have an LLC, the address doesn't match. The DOT needs you to change the address on the LLC so that they can actually issue a DOT number to you. Because there's so much fraud in transportation, and it is so heavily regulated. Some of these practices that are commonplace or even good for another type of business can really shoot you in the foot as a motor carrier. And so that's one of the things we try to help people solve, is how do you do this for transportation specifically? We only help motor carriers. We don't even set up brokers and broker authorities or anything like that. Our entire focus is motor carriers and how to help them establish and operate.
Now, you worked at Schneider. They're one of the biggest carriers in the game. What did you see there that made you think small carriers are getting this wrong that led you to want to help them?
Well, and so yeah, small carriers are actually customers of Schneider as well. They have a brokerage division. They sell trucks, they lease trucks, things like that. So, we had some exposure to that community already, and we knew from the data that large carriers are privy to that the market is made up of these small carriers. And so one thing that was one of the early ideas that we had was how do we look at what Schneider does as like regulatory and technical, and they have all these teams supporting the guys in the trucks. How do you give some of that firepower to the small carrier who can't afford to have a tech department, who can't afford to have a person on regulation and compliance? How do we build out a product that delivers those advantages to the guy, the owner operator, or the guy with 10 trucks on his fleet? Because there is a lot of advantage to scale, but at the same time technology starts to level that playing field. And how do you bring some of that to the smaller carrier that the larger carriers are doing for really good reason?
So let's talk a little bit about the start of a trucking company. What does CarrierForge do that YouTube tutorials and one size fits all consultants can't?
Yeah. So, it's when you say I'm starting a carrier, it's funny. So we get a lot of these calls, right? Like, hey, call me. I've got questions. And it's like, a lot of that, it's like going to a mechanic and asking for advice on how to fix your car before they've looked at your car. You have to know the plan. And so that's really the first thing we do when they come to us and we have them create an account. It's free, takes maybe 5 minutes, and we get down to the questions that matter. Are you crossing state lines? What state are you in? What type of equipment are we operating about? Do you hold a CDL or not? That because we help with all types of capacity, not just semi trucks. But that helps us dial in on what they need. So if you go to YouTube, this video is not going to know what you need. It's going to know what some type of structured trucking company needs. It's going to lack all of the context to your state, your operating radius, your truck's weight rating, if you hold a CDL or not. And that all really lends itself to what do you need to actually launch and what don't you need, right? So we also see a lot of generic people that help with startups and companies that they just have these cookie cutter programs where it's everybody gets the same interstate authority package versus what we do is go, you don't need this permit. So why are we going to issue it? Why are you going to pay for it? But you do need this permit that they don't do because this is specific to the state you're operating out of, and they don't want to get down to that level. They just want to get you your federal stuff and move on, and leave you holding the bag and trying to figure out, or at the weigh station when you get a citation for not having a local cartage permit or whatever it is. So that's the big difference is I guess, know your customer. We start with understanding what are you doing, so that we can make sure that we get you where you need to be with the minimal amount of cost involved, and still staying legal.
So, one of the things that I always see when this conversation takes place is a lack of realistic expectations. What is the realistic time frame from I want to become an owner operator, I want to become my own trucking company
Yeah.
to I'm actually turning a profit? And do you guys help set that expectation?
Oh yeah, I would say typically 5 to 6 weeks, and again, it depends on the equipment and your operating radius. So I mean, if it's like a really small, like a cargo van not leaving the state, it can be up and running in as little as a week. But typically, you're going to have other things, even if you're not leaving the state. That's kind of where we get into as well the mentorship. There's a difference between what you legally need and what you actually need to make it successful. Brokers and shippers set their own expectations that don't align to the legal minimums or the legal expectations. So that's a part of the education as well is, okay, technically you don't need this legally. And people might be screaming that at you that you don't need that. But when you go to find freight or get on a load board or whatever it is, that's when it shoots you in the foot. And then it's something that takes 3 weeks to get approved. And you're already paying for your insurance and your vehicle and you quit your job and all this stuff. So um, that would be a big part of it is helping people understand that. And so to your point, setting that expectation of what is it going to cost is something we do outside of just our cost, right? We're a service, we're getting permits. There's a cost to that. But also your cost, right? How much is it going to be for insurance and what other equipment are you going to need and things like that. So helping them zero in on what's the actual startup cost going to be and how long is it going to take. But in general, I would say if they're on the ball and actually ready to go, 5 or 6 weeks from start to starting to haul freight.
So let's talk business plans. Most drivers, when they have this idea that they want to become their own business, they know how to haul the freight. They know how to get it from point A to point B. But that doesn't mean you necessarily understand business, the startup of a business, how to run a business, how to keep a business, how to scale a business. How do you help bridge that gap at CarrierForge?
Yeah, so a part of it is that education and doing it over time, right? Someone can't just start and make and understand everything they need on day one by watching videos or reading content. And so we try to do it kind of as a drip feed over time. So, establishing what they need to understand right in the beginning. And it usually starts with kind of compliance, understanding what permits they need, which ones renew, what's that cost going to be, how long is it going to take. And then we start moving them during that process into things like getting, their self set up with qualification companies that brokers trust to decide who they'll work with, making sure they have things in place, or at least recommending that they do, that are going to help improve their score with those qualification companies, so that brokers are willing to work with them, because there's things you can do that'll get you a yes from a shipper or a broker that if you don't do can get you a no, even if you're apples to apples otherwise. You both have the same safety score, you're both a brand new carrier. They're looking deeper than that because of fraud in the industry and other things. So kind of walking them through those steps. And it's a mix, right? Some of it's done on the product itself as they're walking through the step. It kind of stops and says, okay, this is important that you understand this bit of information. We try to boil that up to what matters. So, this is what this is, and this is why it matters to you, and this is how we're going to execute it. And other things are, tools they'll use, like we help them calculate their cost to operate. So it's kind of more of an interactive tool to input things and give them advice, because some of your cost to operate, especially in the beginning, is setting targets. And so a lot of new carriers don't know how many miles a week is realistic, what percent deadhead is realistic for a new authority. So kind of helping by giving those pieces of information that they're not going to have, while they give us the pieces of information they do, like what is their insurance premium, how much are they paying for the truck per month, to help them calculate out, well, where do they need to actually be to be profitable. And then we have, video courses and lessons as well. Again, we try to keep things tight and impactful, though. We know people don't want to sit and watch an hour on a topic typically, or don't want to read a whole novel about something. So we try to scale that
There's only so
to
many Dan
having
Baker
an
videos we
informed
can all
business
handle.
owner. Sorry, say that again.
There's only so many Dan Baker videos we can handle to learn everything.
Yeah, and some of it's great. I mean, it's actually funny when we were doing what we call our Freight Academy, that has a few different videos on topics like negotiating and stuff like that. My opinion, truly, for a while, was this is online for free. Why, I don't need to put this into the product. Ultimately, we didn't want to just be another content thing like that. But in the end, when we did decide which ones to do, it was interesting, because I honestly think there's a really different perspective we brought to it, that the open YouTube kind of stuff doesn't. That's more about clicks, right? A lot of those channels are about outrage and clicks. And it's like, that's not what this is. This is about education and successfully running your business. Let's keep it realistic. I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear. I'm going to tell you what you probably need to hear to understand how to, try to help you be successful in the market. So that's one of the differences too.
So a lot of people have to evaluate, like, do I want a box truck? Do I want a semi truck? Do I want a package delivery van? Like, what do I want? What is the process that much different from the three? How do you decide what's a better entry point for someone as a startup? And
Yeah.
what's your advice to those people considering that question?
Well, I would say, I think starting off, a CDL is a really valuable asset. And so often I would say, if you can use it, use it. The heavier, the more cargo you can haul. What we would typically see is that's a higher revenue and a higher profit if run, effectively. However, the flip side of that is, the heavier the equipment, the more expensive it's going to be to get in. You're going to pay more for your truck. You're going to pay more for your insurance. You'll have some more regulatory costs. But I always tell guys, don't let the regulatory stuff prevent you. Don't go, semi truck, maybe I should just do a box truck because I'm worried about paperwork. That's what we solve, and it's not going to cost much more. It's just a couple extra steps. And that's really what we see from a compliance perspective. It's just stripping away regulatory steps. The lighter you go and the tighter you operate to your radius. Although the radius thing is more of the legal requirement, the shippers and the brokers typically have the same requirements of everybody. But there's still steps that the shippers and brokers don't care about that you legally need the heavier you go. So for me, a lot of that decision is going to be, how heavy of a truck can you operate? Do you have a CDL or not? And then what's your budget, right? So getting into a lighter truck is going to cost less, but in the end, probably won't reach the same level of profitability as like a Class A, 18-wheeler CDL holder would be able to get to. But the nice thing is you can also upgrade as you go. So we do have guys that'll start as like hot shot and then move into a semi truck. They were driving semi. They went, they had a pickup truck. So they use the asset they have to keep that initial cost down, start their authority there. Most of that stuff transfers directly over to the next truck. It's not like they have to start all over as a semi truck company when they were a hot shot. Their authority age, all that stuff and safety score, all that carries over when they get into a heavier truck. They just have to make sure they're compliant and that truck is set up to move into it.
So let's talk opportunity. Is the freight market a good opportunity and setting right now for someone to start a trucking company? And how do you help them make that call? Because it's brutal. The last 3 years has sucked. So if someone's looking at the last 3 years, they're like, maybe I don't do this. Maybe I go start up a restaurant. They might have a better success rate.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I would point out that, I used to, let's say 6 months ago or last year, a big thing that I would tell people is there's never a good or bad time necessarily. There's just trade-offs, right? If you get in during a really hot market, you're probably going to pay a lot for your equipment. You're going to be coming in when there's a ton of capacity already coming in. If you get in a slower market, the equipment's going to cost a lot less, and things like that. Now, right now, it's really interesting. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't want to make too many guesses because something that we also say is we don't want to convince anybody to start a trucking company. We won't do that. We get people who want to know how much am I going to make. We're not going to throw a number at you. Anybody that will, I would argue, is trying to take advantage of you. We're here to help people who are going to do it. Someone who's decided they want to start a trucking company, if they're going to, we will be the best partner. We're never going to try to convince somebody that's not sure if they should that they should. That's their decision as a business owner. It's their risk they're taking, and we want to be totally transparent and honest about that. We're just going to do everything we can to support them if they've made that decision. Now, the market, though, it's extremely interesting right now. We have access to and privy to a lot of data that larger fleets and organizations utilize. And what we're seeing in that data is that in, first quarter, second quarter, 2022, the market flipped from favoring someone independent, their own authority, to favoring really lease operators over the independent authorities, someone, operating in someone else's authority with their truck. And that has flipped in the data November, December of 25. So this is the first time in about 3 years plus that the market is actually favoring someone running under their own authority. So we're really excited about that. And that flip happened, like I said, end of last year and has only continued. That gap has gotten wider and wider, more favorable to the person with their own authority. Sense. And so we're really excited about that because that's our customer base, right? That's who we support. We didn't necessarily feel it was a horrible market in the last couple of years. We have a lot of clients having a lot of success, and we do everything we do or can do to support that. But at this point, the market is starting to favor that versus us having to, generate and create that with our client. Less work to have that same result. But at the end of the day, like I said, it is still going to be hard work. This is not, we don't try to tell anybody it's easy money. Trucking is going to be hard. I think running any company is going to be hard. And if you're not ready for that, you're probably not ready to have a business.
Now, what do you wish more people understood about what it really means to own a business, not just own a truck?
Yeah, I would say, like I said, it's the strategic thinking, it's the planning. You're not just operating paycheck to paycheck. You have to take, when you have these big wins. A good example would be like annual market conditions, right? Knowing when you're in your good market and not going, oh, look at how much money I'm making and taking that all home for you, but understanding,
That's not
the
for my
next
boat.
quarter is not. Yeah, don't buy a boat, not yet. But understanding that next quarter doesn't look like that, that you can predict that you can plan for that. And so you have to take some of that revenue and that profit and be, hold it over, understanding that that's going to dip and then it's going to come back up. So I think it's that being strategic and planful and not just, as a company driver or an employee, your rate per mile is your rate per mile. You might get less miles per week and suffer when the market suffers a little bit, but you're not actually typically going to feel those general annual cycles as much. So having that plan and understanding and knowledge is probably the big one that I think would differentiate a successful business owner from somebody that's just thinking of it like I'm good at driving, so I'll be good at this.
So I guess my hard stop question for you would be something along the lines of, if a company driver called you right now and said, I have $0 in my savings account. I can get a truck with $0 down. I don't have anything in savings. I want to start my own authority in the next 90 days. I think I could borrow a little bit of money to get it going. Yes or no? And what life lessons are you giving them?
Yeah, that's no. I would say, it takes money to start a trucking company. If you have $0, then you're not ready to launch, even if you own a truck. I would say taking the truck out of it, we would estimate like 6 to 10,000 is probably the realistic launch number for a semi. And that's, without a ton of operating capital to deal with if that truck breaks down in month two. So it depends on conditions and risk and everything else. So I think some of the numbers are overinflated that you hear, that people say 80,000, or even when they say 30,000. We have a lot of guys starting for a lot less than that, even if they don't have equipment yet. Obviously more capital is more better. You have, you can weather things a little bit better, but you don't need as much as I think a lot of places state. And there is opportunity, even if you have very little capital. I would just say you might not be ready today for your own authority, but if you're a company driver, we can also assist you with figuring out, how to take that next step, maybe get into lease operating, the type of program where you run under someone else's authority, but you do get a truck and you start, that process of owning that truck and learning how to run some of the business, but not the full picture of running a full motor carrier with its own authority. And that's kind of where we try to help those people, is understanding what the cost is. So if that is you can still create an account with us. It is free. And if you tell us you don't have any capital, the platform helps you understand, okay, well, this is realistically what this is going to look like, so that you can, again, start making a plan for when could you launch a trucking company, right? Just because you don't have any capital today doesn't mean you can't work toward building that capital to start next year or 6 months or when you'd be ready. So we don't turn those clients away. We don't say, oh, you don't have any money, you're not worth anything to us. We put a lot of work into the information and resources available to people who flat out tell us they have no capital to get started. We want to stop the bus because we don't want to issue them a DOT or take a few $100s from them that they aren't ever going to get operational with. That's not the goal here. The goal is to launch successful trucking companies. And so we help them in that way, but no, they're not ready today if they have $0.
No, I appreciate you taking the time, and I love what you guys are doing. I'm all about helping set people up for success. The one thing that I love about trucking is you get what you put into it. So to see people out there helping people live that American dream within the trucking industry, I love it. And we're definitely going to have you back to have this conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on. Thanks.
All right. Well, now we're going to go to a shout out from our sponsors over at Hey Bubba. Check this out.
Hi, I'm Bubba, the one and only voice AI that solves all your trucking needs. Whether it's dispatch, managing fleet, or negotiating, I can handle it all. With just one command, I can make 10 parallel calls to brokers and negotiate the best rates for you. And it doesn't stop there. I can auto-book the ideal load for you in less than 10 minutes, so that you can focus on driving while I handle everything else. Come, let's work together. Try me out for free at bubba.ai.
And we're back. And up next, joining us is Scott Cornell. He is the Chief Risk Officer. And listen, before even any of that, before his current company, he was the VP of Transportation Risk and at Strategy at Travelers. He literally wrote the book on cargo theft prevention. And he just joined Logistiq as part of the major industry consolidation play on their end. And today, he's joining BreakCheck to talk about what carriers and brokers don't know about their insurance that could destroy them. Let's give him a round of applause and welcome him to the show. How's it going, my guy? Long time no.
Hey, good to see you. How you doing?
Trying to get to the bottom of a lot of different things that can hinder a carrier from growing or even starting correctly. And I couldn't have that conversation without talking about insurance. And there's a lot of things that play into insurance.
Yeah, the insurance world can be complicated if you're not that familiar with it, and that's part of what we do is make it less complicated, make it more understandable, easier to use for our clients. And a big part of it for us, we're actually now through the consolidation called SPG Cargo and Logistics. They blended two MGAs together, and we're the largest MGA in the industry, and we can basically offer insurance coverage on almost every aspect of the supply chain right now. We spend a lot of time, you and I have spoken in the past. I have over 30 years experience in cargo theft and supply chain security. So we spend a lot of time, if we use that as an example of a topic, talking to our insureds, educating them on it, explaining it to them, making it less complex, less confusing, trying to help them find solutions, help them evaluate how they're handling it internally, training their staff, all that type of stuff.
So you have a very diverse background. So we're going to dive into a couple of these topics, try to highlight that expertise to help others avoid these landmines. Let's talk about the cargo theft crisis. Cargo theft is at record highs, but the way it's happening has changed. There's fictitious pickups, there's identity fraud, there's double brokering. Walk us through what carriers are actually up against right now and some of the things that they might not be paying attention to the way they should.
It's a great point. And, I think we discussed just recently how confusing it's become for everybody. When you look at cargo theft, it all falls into two buckets. There's straight theft and there's strategic theft. The straight theft stuff, which I think still surprises a lot of people, is still 67%, roughly, according to CargoNet numbers, of all cargo theft that we see every day across the industry. But it's that 33%, that strategic theft, that is really confusing the industry. And that's because when you look at the straight theft side, it's basically they're physically going out and stealing it. And there's not a lot of nuance to that. There's different ways they can do it. They can pilfer a load. They can take the whole tractor, the trailer, unmarried trailers, things like that. There's not a ton of sophistication to it. When you get to that strategic theft side, it's 33%. There's 25 to 30 different methods. They're changing methods every day. I also serve as the chairman of TAPA. We put out a bolo to the industry a few weeks ago about a new method called the Trojan driver method, which really confuses people. So that strategic theft side is so confusing, and it's exploded so much, and it really hit a part of the industry that wasn't prepared for cargo theft, that it feels like that's the majority of cargo theft, and it's occupying everybody's time, and it's really stressing everybody out, and people don't know where to turn.
So most carriers think that they're covered. They think they have a plan until a claim gets denied. What are some of the top coverage gaps that you see in standard cargo policies that leave carriers exposed today?
I think one of the biggest things you want to do is you want to make sure you have theft coverage, right? You want to, in the industry right now, there are some carriers who carve out theft, and you have to pay for that additionally. Now, straight theft is usually covered. It's on your standard cargo policy. Straight theft is usually going to be covered. There's going to be some exclusions around employee involvement, employee dishonesty, things like that. So straight theft tends to be covered. It's not always. You should definitely verify that you have that coverage. Strategic theft is often carved out, and that's really going to be more for freight brokers, but it can also apply to trucking companies, especially when you start talking about email penetration and hacking and phishing emails and things like that. You may even need a cyber policy to cover that if you are a trucking company and you're hacked, or somebody compromises your email, or you get hit with a phishing email and they book loads on your behalf, things like that. You may actually need a cyber policy for that. So you're going to want to talk to your agent. If you don't have an agent, you're going directly to the insurance company. These are things you're going to want to ask about. Am I covered for traditional straight theft when if they steal my tractor and trailer, or they open the rear doors of my trailer and they take a pallet or two? Am I covered for that? If my email is compromised, or I'm hacked, or things like that, is that covered? Do I need a cyber policy for that? You're going to want to ask those questions. Then, kind of on a tangent to that, you want to make sure you're covered for the exact commodities that you're moving, that you're hauling. If you're hauling electronics, sometimes electronics can be excluded, or sometimes electronics are covered, but certain electronics are excluded, like cell phones or technology-based stuff like chips or memory boards and things like that. So you really want to get into that conversation with whoever your insurance company is. You also have to worry about things depending on where you're getting your policy. Is it tied to the exact truck? Is it tied to the exact driver? Do you have all that stuff accurate and up to date? How long of a grace period do you have if you get a new vehicle or you get a new driver to add them to the policy? Do you have somebody in your office that's going to make sure that's done in a timely fashion and that's alerted, because you can end up with a denied claim for that?
Well, and you spent a lot of time over at Travelers before doing what you're currently doing. What did you see at the carrier insurance side that made you realize the industry had major blind spots and that you could better serve them in your current role?
Well, there's really nothing that made me think I could do better here that I could do there. I had a wonderful run there, almost 25 years, retired from there actually, and then, took this new role where I'm basically building similar services or building services that might be different or that I hadn't done before for these clients. I think the thing that I see in the insurance industry is there's not enough partnership between the insurance company sometimes and the client. Now, you have the agent in the middle quite often, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have direct. It depends on what insurance company you're dealing with. But even in my prior role and still in this current role, the mentality has always been, hey, we don't want to just take your money and give you a policy. We want to help you. We want to have a long-term relationship with you. And so I've carried that practice through my career, and that's the way we're doing it here at SPG Cargo and Logistics. We want a long-term relationship with our clients, and we feel the best way to do that is to not just send them a policy, but to make sure they understand their claim, understand their coverage, understand that they have a service where they can call me if they have a cargo theft issue, or they're concerned about cargo theft, or they need education on cargo theft, or they need resources around cargo theft. We also have in-house risk teams that can help with safety and all these other things that are related. We have a legal team now that can help the freight brokerage industry around the new and the trucking industry around the Montgomery ruling and questions around that. So offering services, partnering with your clients, having a closer relationship, making sure that you're there as a resource for them. And we think that in doing so, it stabilizes the risk for the client, meaning they learn how to risk mitigate. We risk mitigate with them. It makes them more consistent. And when they're more consistent, your rates and your policies and your coverage tend to be more consistent along with that.
So is there a single thing that's more important than another that they could implement today before their next load ships that can reduce their theft exposure?
On the trucking side?
Yeah.
On the trucking side, I think it's really about awareness. It's really understanding, hey, I'm hauling electronics out of California. So if you look at the CargoNet numbers, right, I would encourage you, if you're in trucking, CargoNet has great rates for trucking. If you're small, medium, whatever, I don't work at CargoNet. I don't have any interest in that, but I think it's a great resource where, as a trucking company, you can see that. I think the latest numbers are, if you're hauling electronics out of Southern California, you have a 91% higher chance of being targeted for theft than you do if you're hauling it into California. Well, if I'm a trucking company and I see that data and I have routes that are coming out of Southern California and I'm hauling electronics out of there, I'm going to want to coach my drivers on that. Or if I'm an owner operator, I'm going to want to know that. And when I'm dealing with freight brokers, or I'm trying to get business, or I'm trying to get better rates, I can sell myself that, hey, I'm aware of this concern. I use high security rear door locks. I'm fueled and ready to go when I pick up the freight, so I don't stop for the first 150 to 200 miles. I park in well-lit areas. I have tracking in my trailer. I have tracking in my cab. All these things mitigate that theft risk. Is it going to be perfect? Is it all, 100% going to guarantee that you don't have a theft? No, but it puts you in the higher percentile of risk mitigating companies that are aware and take care around that type of freight. And if you're a shipper or you're a freight broker that's experienced cargo theft out of Southern California around electronics, you want to hear that from the trucking companies that you're partnering with. You want to know that they're partnering with you on that risk mitigation, and you're probably going to give them more volume. You're probably going to give them better lanes. You might actually give them some better rates. So I think that the trucking companies can definitely make, those are kind of smaller changes, slight changes. There's a lot more to that, but we can only cover so much today.
Absolutely. We're going to shift gears into liability. Freight broker liability has become one of those legal minefields all in itself. What are brokers underestimating about their exposure? And what's a claim that would keep a broker up all night?
Well, I think the claim that tends to keep broker up all night is the big one. That somehow a trucking company that they've been involved with or that they've hired has been in a serious accident or experienced a serious accident or something like that. Nobody wants to see that happen. Obviously, we all want everybody to be safe, and I think that that's why it keeps people up at night, because you just don't want that to happen. It's bad for everybody. And you don't want to see people hurt or injured or worse. So I think those are the things that tend to keep people up at night. I think with the Montgomery ruling, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of concern. When you think about what is the definition of a safe carrier, everybody's trying to determine what that is right now. And that's going to take a little while. I think that's going to take some time for the industry to figure that out. When you read the judgment or when you read the decision, you see some light at the end of the tunnel in some of the language that Justice Kavanaugh wrote and some of the information that he put in there. But again, some of the terminology is vague. What is a safe carrier? What is taking good care to determine what a good carrier is? So I think those are the big questions. And I think right now, the freight broker industry, that intermediary space, is really trying to figure out what are the correct resources. What is the definition of that? How far do I have to go? And I think even shippers are wondering, what is their role in all of this? And I think that's going to take some time to sort out. We have some in-house expertise. Justin Olson is our lead attorney on this, and he came from C.R. England Logistics. He's been involved in this through the TIA and monitoring it all along. And he's spending a lot of time with our clients and our agents, trying to do the best we can to give them guidance as well. And we're still in the process of learning how this is going to look as it goes forward.
So one of the biggest questions out there is when a shipment goes sideways and there's a dispute between a carrier, a broker, a shipper, how does that all get sorted out at an insurance level? How does insurance decide who's going to be the one holding that bag?
Well, certainly every scenario has its different nuances, and that's not me trying to avoid the answer. That's the fact. I've been around this industry and around cargo. If I use cargo theft as an example, over 30 years, and every single time there's some different nuance to it. So if we just create a little bit of a scenario and we say, okay, freight broker properly vets the carrier, and they know that ABC Trucking is a legitimate trucking company. There's no nefarious activity. There's no red flags, anything like that. And they assign ABC Trucking to go pick up the freight, truckload of widgets, or, if we want to use something specific, flat screen TVs from a shipper out of Southern California. And they communicate clearly to the shipper, we're sending ABC Trucking. And sometimes they even go further. Here's the truck number. Here's the driver name. Here's the driver's information, things like that. And then you'll see the bad guys will show up at the dock at the shipper, and they'll say, well, we're here on behalf of ABC Trucking. They sent us because they didn't have enough trucks, or for whatever reason, they just say, they sent us. And the shipper loads that truck and they take off with the load. And then ABC Trucking shows up and says, hey, we're here for that load, and that load's already gone. Well, how are you going to hold the freight broker liable for that? How are you going to hold the carrier liable for that? Those two parties did everything that they were supposed to do. So that's part of what we'll do for our clients is we investigate those and we show, here's exactly what happened step by step. And depending on who our client is, right, we could say, listen, if we're insuring the freight broker, they obviously did everything right. They vetted the carrier. They sent the right carrier. If we're insuring the carrier, or even if we're not, and we say, hey, the carrier accepted the load, they did everything they said they were going to do. They showed up on time and on the date that they were supposed to, and the shipper gave the load to the wrong party. Well, logic would say that's going to point back to the shipper. Now, if you're the freight broker and you hire a bad guy, that hasn't been determined completely either yet. And the Montgomery ruling may have some effect on that. There are some people who think that the Montgomery ruling opens the door a little bit to say, what's the responsibility of the freight broker in vetting the carrier and making sure they're not a bad guy? Others say, no, it didn't open that door. So again, that's something that's going to play out. But if you're the trucking company and you're an innocent party in this, and you are a legitimate trucking company, and you showed up and did everything you were supposed to do, how are you at fault?
So real quick, for people that want to learn more, obviously you guys have this powerhouse of brands with SPG. How can people find you guys? How can people get this information and get involved?
Well, they can go to our SPG website, obviously, but you can feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, but also you can contact me directly at Scott@Logistiq with a Q on the end .com, and a lot of people reach out to me that way. You can also get in touch with me through TAPA. I'm the chairman of TAPA, Transport and Asset Protection Association, so you can reach me that way. I'm not hard to find.
And before we let you go, our hard stop question is, 5 years from now, what do you think is more likely to put a carrier out of business? Bad freight markets or cyber-enabled cargo theft?
Small trucking, or if we're talking small trucking, I think the cyber stuff is going to become a real threat for small trucking. So you have to be really careful around that. The market, I'm not the right person to predict the market.
I don't think anyone is. They've been saying second quarter for a very long time.
Yeah, right?
Every year it's second quarter. So
every year it's second quarter, or second half of the year. We think, right around mid-year, it's going to start to turn around. So I'm not the guy to predict the economic side of it, but the cyber stuff, I'm actually doing a presentation today at the ERMI Transportation Conference on the cyber-related, the technology-related breaching in the transportation industry, and that's tough right now. And it's just getting worse every day.
No, I appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate you sharing those insights. That's going to close us out for today. But listen, we're going to see you Thursday. I'm going to take you out with this. You might think trucking's broken, but here's some proof that so is warehousing. I'll see you Thursday. Thanks for tuning in to Break Check.
Welcome back to the loading zone. Today's deep thought: trucks have big wheels.